And I am live. Hello, world. Welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. So, yes, I'm going live. I want to address, um, and of course, this will anybody who has had past comments, who I haven't directly addressed. I'm going to address several of them. This bunch. So as time goes on, I'll get to more and more comments, but there are some that I'm going to get to tonight. And hey, let's start with before before we get into it, let's just talk about some of the things that have been going on lately. In addition to the incident with the protest, the Plano protest in Plano, Texas, I could be pronouncing wrong. Plano. It's probably Plano, Texas, but there was, the march, BLM march, and the gentleman just was very angry, going off, telling the police, "Shut this down! Why are you letting this go on?" And people on the right were mad that the protesters weren't arrested. People on the left were mad that this guy wasn't arrested, and there were the people that responded. So it's interesting. The people that responded on the channel were mad that the protest was happening. Oh, they shouldn't be blocking the road. And they're saying blocking the road is illegal. So like in New York City, some people said some people said blocking the road is illegal. Some people said blocking the road is a crime. There's a difference between those two things. Because in New York City, blocking the road is not a crime, it's an infraction. So they actually make the distinction between a crime being a misdemeanor, something that's punishable by some kind of time, some kind of prison time, versus an infraction, which is punishable by tickets, some kind of fine or something like that. So and my question is, nobody that claimed that it was a crime was able or did produce any backup evidence to support those claims. That's the question. If you're gonna say it's a crime, then you should be able to say, boom, this is where it is. If you're gonna say it's illegal, you should be able to point to where it says it's illegal. Because I I did my research. I found out whether or not it is illegal, whether or not it is a crime. I also did my research on destruction of personal property, damaging and destruction of personal property, because in that event, remember, that big guy swings and knocks that woman's phone out of her hand. Now, the question is, and it's amazing that the people that were mad about the protest had nothing to say about that guy, damaging somebody's personal property. Like if you're for law and order, you can't say, "Oh, well, I'm for law and order until somebody does something I secretly am cheering for. Then you can violate the law however you want to." That's not how it goes. But we're seeing that level of hypocrisy all across the board. We have seen people, and I talked about it, in my Sunday episode, that you've got people who are claiming that they're against police killings of unarmed people. And then they're silent about Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt should not be dead. Like, just, I don't care if you agree, if you're a MAGA supporter or not, Ashley Babbitt should not be dead. She was an unarmed woman who was trespassing. That's it. That's the worst you could. Okay, so she was in the Capitol building. She was unarmed. She was about to go through that window. That's it. She had no weapon. So the cop shooting say, "Oh well, they didn't want her to get to the constable." Number one, you could have used less than lethal force. And if they're saying that lethal force is justified to protect the lives of Congress people, but not justified to protect the lives of you, me, or police officers, like, are these public servants, or are these like our kings and our gods? Like, it's ridiculous. Don't sit here and tell me that their lives are worth more than everybody else's, and that in defense of their lives, all the rules go out the window. There's nothing special about There really isn't, especially if you just look at the stuff that they've been doing, especially the past year. Over the past year, the stuff that Congress, the House of Rep and the Senate have done, the destruction, the havoc they've wreaked on this country, the just blatant theft. You cannot sit here and say that these people are special. Uh, so to say that in shooting her was justified in defense of them, despite the fact that none of them are in the immediate vicinity, like there's no justification for shooting Ashley Babbitt and then everybody silent. So if, I'm glad to see that her family filed a lawsuit, and and the government's just going to pay it off because guess what? It's our money anyway, and that's what the government does. They don't feel it. As long as they can just steal our money, they'll pay it out to somebody. Okay, we'll just kill somebody, pay it out. It's like when these pharmaceutical companies have made trillions of dollars, and okay, yeah, we'll pay a couple of $1 million. We'll violate the law. We'll do human testing, and fine us, and then they pay it off, and they're still profiting off of whatever it was that they were testing on human beings. That's the way the government is operating, which is impunity because they don't really feel it. Money means nothing to them. They can print it, they can steal it. It means nothing to them. It's not theirs, it's ours. So they don't care. But it's about consistency. So if you're against the unarmed killing of people, police unarmed, law enforcement killing unarmed people, be against Ashley Babbitt too. There's no shame in being consistent. There's no shame in saying, listen, this was wrong. It was wrong when they killing Dante, getting into the just trying to run away. It was wrong killing George Floyd. It was wrong killing Ashley Babbitt. There's no shame in being consistent and acknowledging that all three of those things were wrong. They should not have happened. Now, back to was Casey Taylor, was Ashley Babbitt an alt-right January 6th protester? Yes, Ashley Babbitt was a January 6th protester. She was at the Capitol building, huge Trump supporter. There's like social media. They looked at her social media, and she's wearing a MAGA hat. But one of the interesting things was she was a business owner. I think she had owned a gym or something like that. And so if you realize that we're coming out of the pandemic, the lockdowns, why Ashley Babbitt was frustrated, why she was pissed off, why so many people were on both the left and the right, was our lives were completely upended this past year. And it's people I've seen on the left and the right that don't want to acknowledge the true source of the other side's pain. And it's being manifest in the election results on the right, on MAGA people, and on BLM, Antifa side, it's being manifest in police brutality, police shootings. But all of this was those were catalysts to a greater frustration of how drastically our lives were changed over this past year. And we have to acknowledge that, because even now, the effects are still being felt when we're looking at just the rise in crime and all kinds of stuff, bad stuff still happening, because people are still feeling it. People haven't recovered, not financially, not emotionally. I mean, the suicide rates just been crazy. And until people are willing to acknowledge, and there's some people who won't acknowledge it, like the government, your typical politician will not acknowledge it because they don't want to acknowledge that they played a game with people's lives that caused untold damage. They're going to sit here and pretend like this absolutely had to happen and there wasn't better ways for them to handle this. They're going to act like getting N95s, mass producing N95s, wouldn't have done so much a better job of keeping numbers down and letting people still go about their lives and their businesses, and letting people who were actually at high risk, people over 65, people with pre-existing health conditions, letting them quarantine and letting everybody else go outside and handle their business while wearing actual personal protective equipment, if they're going to act like those weren't better solutions, as opposed to just shutting down cities, states, economies, and just causing upheaval that is long lasting even after people have recovered, after COVID, the transmission numbers of COVID has gone down. Okay, Casey Taylor. Do you get the impression that an increasing number of Black Americans are becoming irritated by the far left agenda? Definitely. Okay, so you have Black conservatives, Black libertarians that never like the far left agenda. As far as the majority, I think the majority of Americans are feeling not necessarily irritated, but let down. So they're not seeing the results, and they're starting to question, what's going on. This is supposed to be helping us. Like, where's the help? Why aren't our lives improving? And so that's why the far left is getting more desperate with everything they're proposing. They're like, oh, well, okay, not just $15 minimum wage. Let's do a $20 minimum wage. Not just free health care or lowering the Medicare age. Let's get Medicare for all. Like, they have to promise more and more stuff to get people to say, okay, because the effects of their policies already have not been improving people's lives, and people are like, what's going on? So that's one of the interesting things, and one of the things I describe as a huge failure of progressive policy, democratic social, or if you want to call it social democracy, these policies, is that they fail, and instead of saying, okay, it's failing, they say, okay, no, we need to do more. Like, we need to go further in this direction, even though every policy we implement, more control of your lives. So they raise the minimum wage, like in New York City, we have a $15 minimum wage. Businesses going out of business, cutting staff, people's hours have been cut. Businesses have closed, have shortened their operating hours. So we used to have a whole bunch of stuff that was open 24 hours in New York City. Like, I remember there was a Best Buy on 14th Street, 24 hours. I loved it because I worked late. I would be able to go shopping off hours. That's closed down. Well, it's not completely closed down, but it closes at like 11 or 12 now. And there's a CVS right by where I work. Used to be 24 hours. Now it closes at like 9 o'clock at night. It's just all of these things, all of these policies that they implemented actually actually created unintended consequences. They can say they're unintended, but they can't say is that these consequences were unforeseen, because people predicted that these things would happen. But I do want to get to the issue of the Plano, Texas protest. So I looked it up. Is obstructing traffic in Texas a crime? Yes. Obstructing traffic in Texas is a crime. However, there's a couple of things that need to be taken into consideration, because they say obstructing Texas without authority and privilege, without legal privilege and authority. So, and I need to find out. I would assume, but if you have information to the contrary, that legal privilege includes permits. So if you have a permit to conduct a procession, to do a parade, to do a protest, and it's passing a roadway, then that would mean that is not against the law. Nobody has commented whether or not this protest had a permit, but the fact that there were police on the site suggests that possibility. I'm not saying it's a certainty. I'm saying that possibility exists. But here's the thing: there's more, because the law says that if this if people, okay, actually there's two things I want to touch on. One, they recently changed that law. They recently changed the law to make it so that you can do as much as 6 months in prison. So they made it a misdemeanor now, if you're obstructing traffic without legal privilege or authority. And the other thing I wanted to mention was there's a caveat to being arrested for that crime, that if the police must give you the opportunity first to disperse. So if the police ask you and you disperse, you do not get arrested. If the police or fire department or somebody in authority ask you and you do not disperse, then you get arrested. With the cop there not asking them to disperse, that would indicate that's why they can't get arrested, because he would first have to tell them to get out the way before he could then start arresting people. I also looked up the situation about damage to personal property. Yes, it says that damaging somebody's personal property is a crime, which I mean was pretty evident, because vandalism is pretty much a like just in almost in all jurisdictions. But the question is, in this case, yeah. So the guy getting mad, knocking the woman's phone out of her hand, like I'm just saying, you can disagree with BLM and still acknowledge that this guy shouldn't have done what he did. He could have been mad. He could have said, "Hey, get them out the way." He could have done that. He should not have knocked the woman, and there was no reason for that. She was not bothering him. She merely had her phone out. He's in a public place. He should not have knocked the phone out of her hand. That was uncalled for. So, okay. As Jerry Maguire would say, I love black people, but I only know a few. We know the other isn't racist, but how are we going to get anybody to believe us in this cancel-phobic political? Okay, Jerry Maguire say, I love black people, but I only know a few. We know the other isn't racist. Okay, so are you saying that it seems like what you're saying is that you're concerned that people will falsely being accused of being racist? And I gotta say, listen, okay, perfect story. I did a video little while back. I forgot what exactly the topic was, but somebody took issue with something I said in the video, and I says, "Oh no, I'm just I gave them my reasoning, and they said, "Well, no, I think you're a black supremacist." And right now, I have the picture of Boondocks behind me. I had Malcolm X behind me. I said, "I'm a black supremacist. What are you talking about?" It's like, "Oh, you have a picture of Malcolm X. That means you're a black supremacist." Listen, you can't control what other people think. And if a person is going to be reasonable and actually have a dialogue with you, great. If a person is just going to make an assumption and just run with it, you can't do anything about that. And so, reasonable people will not just make an assumption without any evidence and accuse you of something. But there are unreasonable people out there, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can just say, okay, be well, and keep it moving. If somebody is just going to say, falsely accuse you of being racist, in fact, at that time, and it depends on the circumstance, you can try to talk to them. But if you see you're not getting anywhere, then it's probably a good idea just not to have the conversation, because they've already made up their mind for whatever reason, and you just bid them farewell and go elsewhere. And there are plenty of people who are willing to deal with people as individuals and let people show them who they are, as opposed to just making assumptions as to whether a person is racist or evil or whatever, people are willing to actually give people an opportunity to show them who they are instead of just jumping to conclusions. There are some other comments I wanted to also address because in the past, one of the comments I wanted to address was from a video I had done on Candace Owens. And so somebody had said, so I'd done about Candace Owens and Conservative Inc., talking about, Lil Nas X and Cardi B. And the person says, it's concerning because Lil Nas X first hit was used with children. Therefore, the release of his new music video, children were likely to watch due to his first hit was promoted to children. He was invited to numerous elementary schools to speak to children. He was a guest on Sesame Street. This is why it's so disgraceful on all levels. Okay, so here's the thing. There's a lot of celebrities who do adult material and then also will show up on children's programming. Guess what? That's why parents growing up, number one, we weren't allowed to watch TV on school nights unless our parents were there, and it was like we had to do all of our homework, our studying, everything had to be out the way, and our parents had to approve the television show that we're watching. So, like, that's where you need to be, where parents need to say, okay, yeah, you can't just watch TV, whatever you want to watch. Like, we're going to monitor what you're watching. And with technology today, it's not even, see, because back then it was a matter of you just, and I'm dating myself, you turn the channel, the knob. A lot of you like, TVs used to have knobs. Yes, TVs used to have knobs. And you could just turn to whatever channel and that you had, and there you go. Now you have parental controls. So now the TVs are programmed where parents can actually block certain channels and make sure that their kids only watch certain things. But the key is parents have to take advantage of this technology. Use it. Like, these are your kids, and different parents will have different standards for what they do and do not allow their children to watch, to be entertained by. There's a lot of adult material out there, and if you're worried about like Lil Nas X poisoning children's mind, and you've got parents that are just letting their kids watch whatever, Lil Nas X is the least of your worries. Really, trust me, because there's a lot. If parents aren't taking advantage of these technology, these screening technologies, these parental controls, like, their kids are watching a whole stuff that's way more advanced than a Lil Nas X video. So, like, that's keeping things in perspective is something that we need to do, because that children argument has been used to death by politicians to restrict the rights of adults. They will use it every time. Oh, but the children, and it gets really old, because it's like, okay, wait a minute, like, then let the parents of that child control what that child is watching, consuming, exposed to. Let the parents be parents, as opposed to the government thinking that it has the authority to step in and, oh, we're going to control this because of the children. And I'll be getting into this probably next week. Do you know where Section 230 came from? Section 230 was actually a part of a law that was created for the children. Yep. And like I said, the politicians have been using that argument for a very long time. Okay. So there's some other comments I wanted to talk about some. There's another comment about Candace Owens. Um, I'm not seeing it. Okay, I am seeing the comment about protesters cannot block the roadway. That's all you need to know. No, it's not all you need to know, because people can't also can't damage other people's property. So that's something else that we need to know. Um, and the end game. Okay, so somebody, because I did a video on, well, after the verdict, or in fact, I think this was before the George trial, the Chauvin trial verdict. I said, "What's the end game? We can get mad, we can protest, but once Derek Chauvin is convicted, what changes?" And we see how immediately that day somebody was killed. It turns out, like I said, in my opinion, I've done videos about this. I think that was a justified shooting. It was a tragedy. Ma'Khia Bryant was a young girl who was in a bad situation, but she was in the process of she was swinging and about to stab someone. The cop had to make a tough decision in a hurry. He made a call. Unfortunately, she's dead. Fortunately, the other young lady is alive. It was a tough call. But the question is, with this protest, with this, because right now, the Chauvin's appealing his verdict, even, and there may be different grounds for the Chauvin trial as opposed to Amber Geiger, who's also appealing her verdict. Like, what if both of them get um, what if both of them get acquitted, get their verdicts overturned? Then what happens? Like, the question is, just having protests, having marches, and then of course riots, like, that solves nothing. What does that do? And I think I need to make sure to separate protests and marches from riots. Riots definitely don't solve anything. They actually cause more harm than good. You're destroying your community, especially if it's your own community. Like, it's completely counterproductive. Um, and so there needs to actually be a game plan, something like tangible action results that you're striving for, that you're trying to get to, or else, what's the point? And so this person said the end game is more laws and deflationary technocracy, techno for those that make the cut. If the data shows you're not a troublemaker, AI and automation doing all the work, producing all the goods for those that have something value to contribute, making creativity the most valuable asset. So what I don't think they realize what I was talking about. They're talking about the end game of, I guess, society, of everything that's going on in this world, and I'm talking about an end game for those who are concerned about issues like police brutality. So if you're concerned that there's just excessive force, police brutality, too many unarmed killings by police officers, like, you need to have a plan to how are we going to solve this? How are we going to make sure that the people that are being charged with protecting the public aren't a threat to the public? Because that's the difference between having cops shoot people and having a criminal shoot people. We don't want criminals to shoot people either, but they're criminals. Like, if you have a bad guy doing it, you're like, okay, that's what bad guys do. That's why we have cops. But then if you have cops doing it, people get like, well, what do we do? These are supposed to be the good guys. And I think one of the main things that needs to be done is the focus needs to be taken off of the police, because police are enforcing laws. Who's writing these laws? That's where we need to be focused on. That's where we need to put the pressure on. Eric Garner isn't just dead because Daniel Pantaleo choked him out. Eric Garner is dead because New York City politicians wanted to make sin tax on cigarettes. They wanted to make cigarettes so expensive that people would feel less inclined to buy them. And people, instead of saying, "Hey, we're not gonna buy cigarettes," they said, "We're not gonna buy cigarettes in New York City." And that's what they're going to buy cigarettes from someplace else, sell them cheaper here, make a profit. And then they sent the enforcers after him. The problem is the politicians. And people have to realize that, because that's why the politicians keep pointing the fingers at cops. They're distracting us from the fact that they are the problem. So Casey Taylor said, "I think you are a fair and balanced commentator for civilized Americans. Keep up the good work. See you next time." Thank you, Casey. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching the stream, and thank you for interacting. I really appreciate your kind words. Thank you. And yeah, I try, and I will not always get it right. Sometimes I will get emotional. Sometimes my bias will be evident. And when I say my bias, I mean my bias towards one side or the other. My bias towards, because I'm not a fan of government. So I do have an anti-government bias. And I try to be aware of it and try not to let it color, especially if there's an event that there's uncertainty about. I try to make sure, but like I said, I do not always succeed. Sometimes I fall short, and it's important for us to realize, you know what, I may fall short sometimes, and like in the future, I know that I may fall short, but if I'm aware of it, I can work on it. Because there's been times when an incident has happened between a governmental actor and a civilian, and my first inclination is, what did this government person do wrong? Like my first inclination is to support the civilian against the government. That's my first inclination. And sometimes the civilian is doing something they shouldn't be doing. And I'm not just saying illegal, because illegal does not equal immoral. I'm saying sometimes the civilian is actually harming somebody, attacking the police officer. Like, yeah, I mean, there's some of these shootings where the police officers are really trying to stop and de-escalate the situation, and some fool wants to keep going. There was I think it was in Philly, and when the first words of the shooting, people were like, "Oh, this is outrageous," and people in the streets, and then we show the body cam, and the cop is running backwards as the guy is coming at him with a knife, and finally the cop shoots. And it's like, people, stop, just stop. Okay, sometimes the shoot is good. That was one of the times. I mean, he's yelling repeatedly, "Drop the knife," and the guy's So it's like, okay, you know, that's not, you don't blame the cop that time. Be able to look at the individual circumstance, the individual situation, and say, you know what, I get it. So I'm going to leave it there for tonight. Thank you everyone for watching. As always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and I'll be putting out some. I'll be doing some more live streams, and answering some more questions. You know, going on some more issues that people have, comments people have raised. And if you disagree with anything I've said in this live stream, feel free to put it in the comment section, and I will either address it in the comment section or in a future video. I'll see you next time.